Hey guys, how are you doing? D Junior here. Today will be part 1 of a brief introduction to Taiwan's political parties. I think that most people around the world could tell you who the major political parties in the USA are, and maybe even in some other Western countries. They could also potentially tell you who runs China. But ask even someone who has an interest in Taiwan who the ruling party is, and who the other political parties in Taiwan are, and often they will struggle to name even one. Well, in this 3-part series, I'm going to break down the political parties that hold at least one seat at a national level in Taiwan's legislature. We'll be looking at these parties from 3 angles: their history, their current leader, and their policies. So let's get into it. In this episode, I'll be starting with the party that most people who are interested in Taiwan will have heard of, the KMT. The KMT, Kuomintang, or Kuomintang, meaning the Nationalist Party, is one of the 2 biggest political parties in Taiwan, along with the Democratic Progressive Party. But for most of Taiwan's, or the Republic of China's history, they were the only party. This is because they were the revolutionary political party for the Republic of China on the Chinese mainland. They were the party formed by Sun Yat-sen's revolution, which overthrew the Qing dynasty in 1911. After Sun Yat-sen died, the leadership passed to Chiang Kai-shek, a man who was far less influenced by Western knowledge and ideals, and was fiercely anti-imperialism. Chiang went on what was called the Northern Expedition to attempt to unify China and crush the warlords from the KMT's base in Nanjing. Various splits within the party between the warlords, the communist-influenced members, and the central leadership weakened the party over this time. Even though Chiang tried to crush the communist forces of the Communist Party of China in 1934, they survived in the long march up into northern China, where the USSR was able to help them rebuild their forces. Chiang, after being taken hostage by his own subordinates, was forced in 1937 to unite with the communists against the invading Japanese, though this alliance was not very strong, and it allowed the communists to build up their popularity among the general populace to the detriment of the nationalists. However, Japan did lose the war, at which point Taiwan was ceded to China after being lost to the Japanese in the First Sino-Japanese War of 1895. After building strength during the war by often letting the nationalists take the brunt of attacks, by having better PR often resulting from their land reform policies, by gaining Soviet support, and by American diplomatic blunders, the communists were able to defeat the KMT and the nationalist armies in the late 1940s during the final stage of the Chinese Civil War. On the 7th of December 1949, the KMT then officially retreated to Taiwan with 2 million soldiers, millions of refugees, a large amount of artifacts and treasures, and hundreds of tons of gold, which was later used to prop up the economy in Taiwan. Tensions began to flare up between local Taiwanese who, while disapproving of Japanese authoritarian rule, had appreciated its efficiency and stability in comparison to the KMT's disorganized but still authoritarian rule, and the mainlanders who had fled to the island. This led to the February 28 incident in 1947, in which the KMT crushed a massive uprising by killing thousands of civilians, which had been caused by agents of the State Monopoly Bureau striking a Taiwanese widow suspected of selling contraband cigarettes. The result of this was 38 years of martial law and crackdown on intellectual freedom from 1949 to 1987, which resulted in the death or disappearance of over 30,000 Taiwanese intellectuals, activists, and people suspected of opposition to the KMT. This was called the White Terror. Additionally, during this time, the KMT lost the world's recognition of the Republic of China as the sole representative of China in favour of the PRC. Until the 1970s, the KMT did successfully push ahead with land reforms, develop the economy, implemented a democratic system in the lower levels of government, improved relations between Taiwan and the mainland, and created the Taiwan economic miracle. However, the KMT controlled the government under a one-party authoritarian state until reforms in the late 1970s through the 1990s. Although opposition parties were not permitted, the pro-democracy movement Dangwai, meaning outside the party, created the Democratic Progressive Party on the 28th of September 1986. Outside observers of Taiwanese politics expected the KMT to clamp down and crush the illegal opposition party, though this did not occur, and instead the party's formation marked the beginning of Taiwan's democratization. Despite the formation of this new party, the KMT won the first democratic presidential election, with Taiwan-born Lee Teng-hui becoming the first ROC president elected by popular vote in 1996. The KMT was knocked out of power for the first time in the 2000 presidential election, which was won by the Democratic Progressive Party's Chen Shui-bian. The KMT then won again in 2008, both in the legislature and presidency, with President Ma Ying-jeou winning once more in 2012. The DPP, however, have been in power since 2016. So who is the current leader of the KMT? Well, the current chairman of the KMT is Johnny Chiang. Chiang is from Taichung, and after he served in the military, he earned a master's degree from the University of Pittsburgh and earned his doctorate from the University of South Carolina. Initially, Chiang was named the head of the Government Information Office in 2010 during the premiership of Wu Denyi and first presidential term of Ma Ying-jeou, before being elected to the legislature in 2011. After Wu Denyi resigned in 2020 from the chairman position, Chiang ran for the KMT chairmanship election later that month. At the age of 47, Chiang became the youngest ever leader of the KMT. Despite the KMT's softer stance on China and anti-Taiwan independence policy, in March 2021, Chiang rejected one country, two systems as a feasible model for Taiwan, citing Beijing's response to protests in Hong Kong, as well as the value that Taiwanese place in political freedoms. Chiang, however, has stated that he will not run for president in 2024, instead stating he will be a kingmaker who would find the most suitable candidate to lead the party back to power in the 2022 and 2024 elections. Some of the candidates for the 2024 presidential election include Legislative Yuan member Zhou Shuokong, former mayor of New Taipei Eric Chu, the former mayor of Kaohsiung Han Kuo-yu, who lost against Tsai Ing-wen in the 2020 presidential election, as well as the current mayor of New Taipei, Hou Yo-i. I'll make a separate video on these candidates for the 2024 presidential election very soon. For a long time, the KMT has followed what was called the 1992 Consensus, a phrase that refers to an agreement between semi-official envoys from Beijing and Taipei in 1992, stating that both sides of the Taiwan Strait belong to one China. The KMT claims that the envoys agreed to let each side have its own interpretation of one China. However, since their loss in the 2020 presidential election, the KMT has sought to reinvent itself. The KMT stated in 2020 that it plans to drop its China-friendly stance in order to become more popular with younger, democratically minded voters. Bonnie Glaser, director of the China Power Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, made an interesting point in an article that came out last year, stating that there is already an intense debate underway in the KMT about the best policy toward China. The older generation, represented especially by former President Ma, clings to the 1992 Consensus, but the younger generation, represented by KMT chair Johnny Chiang, recognizes that the KMT must modify its stance if it is to win support in Taiwan. Personally, it seems clear to me that the 1992 Consensus just won't fly anymore with the Taiwanese, even if there are many older people who still support it. One need only look at the 2014 Sunflower Movement to see how unpopular Ma Ying-jeou's China policy was, with his cross-strait service trade agreement with China, which, despite being signed, was never ratified due to the Sunflower Movement's massive student protests, which occupied the legislature and forced the KMT to back down on the issue. The opponents of the cross-strait service trade agreement argued that the treaty would benefit large companies while devastating small and medium-sized Taiwanese businesses, that Chinese investment in the publishing industry, coming on top of currently substantial Chinese investment in the news media, would imperil free speech in Taiwan, and that the treaty would in effect lay the groundwork for eventual political unification with mainland China. The crackdown on Hong Kong's freedoms over the last 2 years via the national security law and other local laws has made the idea of reunification with China under the one country, two systems principle unpalatable for the majority of Taiwanese people. This heavily affects the KMT's political strategy going forward, and it can thus be said that the KMT is now in a transition phase and will have to attempt to walk a fine line between not totally abandoning the hope of reunification, while also making it clear that they have no interest in unifying with the mainland as it currently is, and that they support freedom and democracy for the people of Taiwan. As an aside to this, however, it is important to note that the reason why the Matsu Islands and Kinmen have consistently voted for the KMT is because of the KMT's historically pro-reunification stance. A movement away from this stance may see these islands turn to more pro-reunification parties, such as the New Party, the People First Party, or independent candidates that lean in that political direction. The KMT will have to weigh up whether changing their stance on the issue to win more votes on the main island of Taiwan is worth the political loss of Kinmen and the Matsu Islands. Alright guys, thanks for watching. I hope this was able to give you a brief but useful introduction to the current state of the KMT. The next episode will focus on their main rivals, the Democratic Progressive Party. Have a good day, and I'll see you on the next one.